Had some technical problems, but we seem to have that every week. So, all right. Thanks for coming this morning. It's a pretty warm day, although it's cooler than it was, I think, a few days ago. My name is Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. Today we're going to be talking about some of the more exotic fruit trees that are still quite popular. And we'll probably start with one of these is probably more well known, and certainly you get the fruit at the store. So this is a lychee, and it's spelled different ways: lychee, lychee, Lychee. They're not the easiest tree to grow. In fact, generally you do have to find a good plant to start with. So if you bought a lychee, and lychees, let's get a picture out. So if you go to the store, I believe they're available now at the supermarkets, some of the ethnic stores too. Clusters of red strawberry-looking fruit that have a thin shell around them, white succulent flesh, very juicy, and one seed in the middle. They can run $4 a pound, quite a bit. And in this area, if you walk through the neighborhoods a lot, you'll find at least a couple dozen trees producing fruit in Orange County, if not more. So it's certainly possible to do it here. Generally, you do have to have some patience. It's a slow-growing tree. In fact, if you take a seed out of here and plant it, in 5 years it might be this big. So they're really slow. Now so what they do instead of that, because if you grow from seed, and even if you graft them, it's just so slow. So what this tree is normally, how this is normally propagated and what makes it expensive is this is a branch off a big tree. So they took a branch last year and made some nicks in the bark, put green moss around it, keep it moist, the roots will grow out into that. Once the roots grow out, then they cut off the branch and stick it in a pot. Hang on just a second, I'm going to get that echo out. Can you? You just turn it off? Okay, so they take an older branch off of an old tree that's producing fruit, and a good variety. There's a lot of the varieties out there have real large seeds in them, small fruit. What we want is the big fruit, small seeds. Now we get these from a company that's based in Taiwan, and fortunately we have one customer friend who is from Taiwan who can speak the language, and he talked to their company to see which kind they were selling us, because they don't label their lychees, but they told me it was a chicken tongue type, which is a desirable one in Taiwan. It's a fairly good sized fruit with a real small seed. Instead of big seed, it's small seed. So it's supposed to be a nice variety. The key on these two, make sure the soil is good. That's one thing about this company. They have soil that resembles ours. We gave them some bags, I think, once, so maybe they're using it, but they use a better quality soil. Over the years, we've seen them use a better quality soil than other growers. So a lot of our growers will have plants maybe this big that have all burnt tip leaves, and we know this it's something to do with the roots and the soil that they're using. So if you use a good quality soil, in general we grow all our tropicals in our top potting soil, and the main difference between this and other potting soils, if you haven't seen our lectures on it, is that there's no dead things, nothing in here that recently died. So most potting soils on the market, the main ingredient is compost, which is a dead tree they ground up, either the wood or the bark. They let it decompose or rot for a while, then they throw it in the bag and tell you it's real rich, good soil. Well, that's something that just died. It's like telling you, oh, make your house out of dead animals and dead vegetables and fruit. It's like, no, that's not where you want to live. You might be able to get nutrients from it, but not a good, healthy living environment. Same with plants. If they had a choice, especially in a container, pure sand would be fine. It's just heavy. We tried to make lighter weight sand for our stuff. So there's peat moss in here to hold moisture. But it's mostly volcanic rock, sponge rock, sand, charcoal, things that don't change, that'll keep the plant growing well for essentially forever, for a long time.
What's the difference between this or the acid mix?
Our acid mix potting soil has less permanent material in it, so it does shrink. The peat moss, unfortunately, is not quite permanent, so it does shrink, and the acid mix after 1 year can drop about 15%.
Okay, so which one do I use?
Top pot.
Oh, so if I already put it in the acid mix, what do I do? Just add
You can just leave it. It's not that big a deal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're both better than anything else you can get out there, so. So anyway, the other thing with lychees is they have to get some age on them too. So the thicker the stems, the better they fruit. And one other issue we've also seen is their blooming time. So these come from a climate in China that's not unlike Florida, not unlike, say, Mazatlan, Mexico. A little bit chill in the winter, so I would say more like Florida. So they can go down into the high 20s in the winter in China, where these are native to. So they have that little bit of coolness that triggers their blooming. But one of the issues we have here is they bloom here in April. And if it's really cool in April, the trees don't make much fruit, especially the younger ones. The older ones, I think because of their size and strength, they still manage to put on a good crop every year. But when they're young, if they're blooming in April and it's overcast and it's 60 or 70 degrees instead of 80 or 90, which they like better, then you don't get much fruit. So we still remember the year, I think it was 96, when spring in April was like 95 degrees that week they were blooming. Late April, 95 degrees all week. And all of our lychees, even the one smaller than this, had clusters of fruit on them. We couldn't believe it. We didn't even want to sell the plants because the fruit clusters were like this on some of them. We said, well, that's worth more than the tree is worth that we're selling the tree for. But every single plant had fruit, and that's the only time we've ever seen that. Only had 90 degrees when they were blooming. So I've talked to some friends who sell these too. And they said, yeah, when they're blooming in the spring, they put them in their greenhouse or their Quonset hut, which raises the temperature about 10 degrees. So the temperature does help them, especially when they're small. When they get older, we always see the big trees with fruit on them, so it's not as critical. But the younger trees seem to need that heat when they're blooming in order to get the fruit. I don't know if they have to be pollinated. We do see bees on them, so the bees may be doing the work there.
So if you don't need another tree close by?
Wouldn't hurt though. But I've seen a lot of single trees around with fruit on them. So a friend of mine has one, in just one small tree about this tall in Lake Forest, gets fruit every year. There's another one in Mission Vale we see that's about 8 foot. There's one house near Saddleback College that's got 2 or 3 trees in their front yard, all well above your head. They're always loaded every year. So
Which they self-pollinate themselves?
I think so. I don't think you need more than one tree.
Mine is about 2 feet tall, but no new leaves, and they all burn.
That's a soil issue usually.
I put it as a mix, or maybe that one when I dug the hole out.
How old is your tree?
About November, which about the same height.
Yeah, so it may be the soil that came with the tree. You might have to go in on one side and remove a lot of that to see what's happening to the roots. I mean, I've taken plants that are already in the ground, and just dig next to them and remove about half of the dirt. Try not to break too many of the plant's roots off, and then put our top pot back in there, and then let it recover for 3 months, and then do the other side. So you can take it away bit by bit. But we've had trouble with a lot of tropical trees. Like a lot of them are coming from Florida, Florida's not allowed to send any dirt to California, so they usually plant their trees going to California in pure pine bark, and that causes all kinds of tip burning and all that. They just don't like living in that dead stuff. So you do have to be careful with your sources. There's a lot of trees coming into California from Florida. So now these can get 30, 40 foot high, but they are slow. So don't expect it to break 10 feet in your lifetime. So you don't need all that much room. Most of the trees I've seen are not in full day sun. So and if you get 2/3 a day, you're probably good enough on these.
Oh, 2/3.
Yeah, they're evergreen trees, but they are very delicate. You know, you don't want to give them any drought situations or anything like that. Cold, not a problem. They've handled all the cold we've ever seen, so that's not the issue. But the soil and dryness.
So is it like a tropical environment, like a Hawaii, like in Hawaii or something?
Yeah, if you get the early heat, that's the main thing. They don't like true tropical because they need that winter. They want that winter. So like Florida is really good because Florida can get down, you know, well below 30 degrees in central Florida every winter. And in China even, they say where it is, they can get down to the low 20s. So
Get that cold and white.
up in the mountains probably.
Oh.
Yeah, because they get snow up there in the mountains. So yeah, they said they think they evolved in the highlands of China, some of the higher mountains in the northern China. Then they've been working their way south, they said. So that's lychee. Now, so lychee is a little delicate. Longan, which is a relative, is easier to grow, but most of us don't consider the fruit quite as good, although some people like it better. The fruit on lychees and longans tastes a little bit grape-like. So longan, the fruit is this tan color. The shell is smoother. Still, it's like peeling a boiled egg, or excuse me, a hard-boiled egg. And the flesh inside is still kind of grape-like. We've seen trees of these grow fairly fast, 2-3 foot a year. So in the neighborhoods, there are some 20, 30 footers. And they'll make quite a bit of fruit. They don't seem to need quite the heat or humidity that the lychees do to fruit. But the fruit is smaller, marble size. The lychees can get to the size of medium-sized strawberries, so larger fruit. So pretty much we treat longan the same. This is an air-layered variety also. With this one, they did put the name on it, Kohala, which is a Hawaiian variety. And I've grown Kohala, and it did quite well.
Are you saying that was grafted also?
No, air layer. So a branch from an old tree that they make it root before they cut it off the tree. So.
Oh, when they wrap it.
Right.
Like wrap it on the branches.
Right. Make a cut into the bark of the branch. Put green moss around it, wait till the roots start growing into the moss, then cut the branch off. So it's longans. So everything that's air layered is going to be pricey because you can't do that. You know, if you have a big tree, you might be able to do 10 air layers on it that year, and that's all the plants you can do. If you plant things from seed, you can plant hundreds. It's just that they're so slow, it's better to do the air layers. So like this one is 119. This one's 113. And even 20 years ago, they were more expensive than this. So the price is going down since there's more companies doing it. Because when we depend on the local guys to do this stuff, you know, they charge a ton of money because it is a lot of work. Well, you just can't do many at one time.
So when did they start producing fruit, like right away?
Yeah, well, this size is capable, and this size is capable of making fruit too. So they're all capable because they're old branches. So, but they're more likely to get more fruit the bigger and thicker the stems are. So as they get older, they certainly do better. But even the small ones can make fruit. If, again, if the weather's warm in the spring. We were kind of cool this year, so it wasn't the best year for them. So.
So would that smaller one, would that be fruiting now? Like if it was in the ground? Or a little fruit in that?
Yeah, it could have fruited this year. I think we got these, can't remember when we got these now, a couple months ago. I think it's after the flowering season. So we did get an early crop of lychees in, but they weren't ready to be out of the greenhouse yet. They just got set back, so we got in some more that were nicer. Okay, so that's lychees and longans. The other plants we're going to be talking about are from the myrtle family. The myrtle family is the eucalyptus family. So all their fruit kind of look like the little woody seed capsules that eucalyptus trees have. I don't know if you've seen them. They have these little flowers that have puffy stamens, and then they have this base of the flower on eucalyptus that just gets woody and has seeds in there. But all its relatives have a similar flower, kind of with the filaments, no petals, and then they make this part expands into a fruit. Instead of being a little woody capsule, it gets nice and big and makes a fruit. One of the most unique ones, another one that we get from the same Chinese or Taiwanese company that the air layer. This is called a wax apple or wax jambu. It's got a lot of different names. I mean, they call it rose apple in some areas too, but then it gets confused with the next plant. But well, jambu or wax apple. The fruit, I've got a picture in here. So they have kind of reddish flowers or pinkish flowers, and then the fruit form into these kind of bell-shaped or pear-shaped, depending on the variety. There's a lot of varieties. The flesh on these now, I've eaten them, and I'm thinking, I'm eating foam. Some people really like them. Some people find them totally tasteless. They are juicy, but it's like eating foam. And there's not much flavor to them. But some people like that. Now we know they're frost tender. Among these trees are the most frost tender. If you get a good frost, you might lose it. But there are some really productive trees in the area. There's a hill over here in Orange called Panorama Hill. It's an old volcano core. But on one of the lower streets, but still elevated a couple hundred feet off the ground, is this wax jambu or wax apple that hangs over the sidewalk. And I think in about a month or so, just covered with fruit. Just trees about 10 to 12 foot. It's a good sized plant hanging over the sidewalk there, and the fruit the street just get littered with the fruit. So I've gone and picked some of the fruit off it and tried to go, well, it's not that exciting, but it looks really pretty. It looks really unique. But the trees are frost sensitive. Now that hill, if you're anywhere on a hill like that, you're not going to get the coldest frost. So usually it's a good place to put tropicals. In that same yard, there's bananas, guavas, all the tropical stuff, and they're so well elevated. I don't think they'll ever get a nasty frost there. If you plant it in your yard and you're on flat ground or near a big river, get this close to your house, maybe even underneath the roof line, to keep it protected. But generally, yes.
I bought this from you 2 years ago, and I put it in a big pot. And first year it didn't do well, and now it's lots of opportunities, and not even one of the ferns leaf or tip, but no fruit, no flowers. I don't know when it's supposed to flower, and I have lots on it.
We don't either, since this is I haven't grown one of these in my own yard before. Last year we had some trees that were blooming. this size. So, one of the things you don't know is where they took the air layer from. So, if you air layer a branch at the top of the tree, generally those air layers from up there tend to fruit better or fruit sooner. And if you air layer a bottom branch on a tree, generally that branch tends to stay juvenile longer. And that goes with when you take scions for grafting too. So the area of the tree you take the branch from is going to make a difference, and we don't know. We don't know the history of any of these.
Yeah, because these are the summer trees, so
Hmm.
we start seeing.
Right, should have flowers here real quick. At least they're quick. When they make flowers to get to fruit, it's real fast. But I haven't looked at our other ones out there to see if there's any bloom. Now this year everything seems to be delayed a bit because it took us a long time all the way into July to get the warm weather. So we'll see what happens on these. So this one, being air layered, does run, well, it runs $100.
Well, just a tidbit, a jambu, the word jambu, after I bought it, my daughter walked into my house, and I said, look what I bought a wax apple. Now, wax apple in Portuguese is called jambu.
Okay, that's good to
So
know.
that's a Portuguese word.
Okay. Jambu means wax apple.
Popular fruit over there.
Hmm. Yeah, it comes from Malaysia originally, but everything's been taken around the world. So that's that one. And then this one we call it the rose apple. Now it's got different names in different places too. So this one fruits more easily, and it's easier to, it's just faster. So rose apples, we grow these from seed. And this is big enough to fruit this year. We cut it back to get it filled in, so that kind of messed up the bloom for this year. But we have other specimens this size with fruit on them. In fact, we have a couple we put in 24-inch boxes out here. Same age, just we put the bigger ones in a box and didn't trim them. And they've got clusters of developing fruit on them right now. Now, normally they'd be ripe by now. I was timing this class to have the fruit to eat. But right now the fruits are only this big. They do grow about the size of a small apricot. So they're, let's see if I got a picture of those in the book here. No, didn't have one. So these are about this big, and they've got the same little thing that guavas have on the end, the little flower remnant. And they're yellow sometimes with a slight pink tinge to them. Generally, they have a fleshy rind, hollow center, and a big seed in the middle. And so you eat the rind in the skin around the seed. You can hear it shaking when they're ripe, the seed inside shaking. But they taste, well, they're sweet. The texture is similar to apricot. The fragrance is rose. It's really strongly, I mean, you can smell the fruit when you pick it. It's fragrant. So they're quite good. I do like them, although after about a dozen of them, the fragrance is just too much. You have to say, okay, I need to take a break, get this fragrance away from my face. But a nice looking tree, fairly fast growing. So this one's, I think it's 3 years old. So 3 years to get fruit from seed. In 2 more years, they'll be a much heavier producer, and they'll produce for a longer time. But they have fairly large white flowers. No, excuse me, they're yellow. Yellow filaments that hang down on a flower that's about that big. So a nice, good flower show. There's a few trees we know of in the area that have fruit on them, but it's pretty easy. We've been growing these for decades now, and they're quite reliable once they get to the right age. So.
How tall do they get?
Well, there's the biggest one we've seen is not quite 20 foot, but I believe they can get 30, 40. But most people clip them so they can reach the fruit. They look somewhat like eucalyptus, one of the. Oh, yeah, she has a good picture on her phone there. And they can be, as small as a big cherry or as big as a small apricot. So the size ranges, but usually from seed they're quite good. So we have quite a few of these in our store today too. And these, because they're grown from seed, we don't charge as much. These are $40. Although for a 3-year-old plant, we should be charging. But we have some younger ones out there too. The ones in the box, not quite ready for sale. So these are both in the myrtle family of trees. I'll talk about this last one too, but I don't really have much of this to sell today. That's why we didn't put it in the newsletter. But this is a Surinam cherry from South America. And this is one of our favorites. We do like these a lot. So Surinam cherries make a fruit that ranges from a big blueberry to a fairly large cherry. And the fruit are ribbed like pumpkins. They taste kind of like a tangerine. They're juicy. They're fairly soft-fleshed. One seed in the middle. Seed is usually about that large compared to the rest of the flesh. So almost like eating a cherry, but they don't have the cherry flavor. This one, we call this the M. Spira. A good friend of mine, Mike Spira, got the original plant as a seedling from a plant that was bought from Florida. Of course, they're from South America. If you go down, if you talk to anyone from Argentina or southern Brazil, this is, they grew up with this plant. They said, yeah, they just pick them off the street trees there. So this is a special clone. So in the past, we've always grown from seed. So with seeds, you get variability. You get fruit that ripens to either orange or red or burgundy. Almost black, but burgundy. And there's some are better than others taste-wise. I would say from seed, 2/3 to 3/4 are decent, 1/4 are really good, and 1/4 are not worth eating. Now, when Mike grew this from seed, he showed me the fruit on it. It's the biggest fruit I've ever seen on a Surinam cherry, so it was bordering on, bigger than 1/4. And it was the sweetest one I've ever eaten. No sign of any bitterness. Now, my dad hated these when I first started growing them because they said they tasted like medicine. Had a little bit of this off taste, but this one has none of that. So we call it the Mike Spira. Well, might call it the Mike Spira clone. And the other thing about them is most Surinam cherries bloom in the spring and make a crop late spring, and bloom in the fall and make a crop late fall. This one doesn't stop. It fruits year round. And they're evergreen trees. His tree, and we actually sold it here. His big one was about 5 foot wide and 5 foot tall, and fruiting year round. I had one about my mailbox. I think my daughter took some seedlings of that one that had a 4-foot trunk and a head about like this above the mailbox. And that one would fruit year round too with fairly dark fruit. But this one we think is superior. So we'll be taking cuttings of the branches on this to make more plants. I've got 3 cuttings that we did before we sold the plant last year winter. We took a bunch of cuttings and we got about 5 to take. Mike Spira got one. I gave one to one of our good benefactors, and then we've got 3 or 4 of these for ourselves to make cuttings off of, to make new plants of that exact one, because that is the best I've ever eaten. I'm sure there's more out there, but of the ones, and I've eaten fruit off of at least 50 of them, maybe more than that. Some of the ones I've gotten from other suppliers down in San Diego area were pretty bitter and small. but this one is as good as we've ever eaten. We think it actually might be a different species. So this one is the Suriname cherry is supposed to be Syzygium or Eugenia uniflora, and we think the one that fruits year-round might be a different species. I saw one thing on the internet about it, but I couldn't find it again, so we'll see. So that's the Suriname cherry. I don't know how soon I'll have the cuttings ready to sell. We have a bunch of these seedlings of this plant that'll be ready by the end of summer. They're about a foot tall now. We want them to get a little bigger before we sell those. But the clones of it could be next year. I mean, when you take cuttings, you have to take them off these real skinny branches. It takes them a long time to get going.
What temperature does it need?
They don't seem to mind. We have not seen any frost damage on them.
So it is not like the typical cherry that really grows in the more East Coast.
No. This is not related at all. It's in the myrtle family, same related to these two plants. So. The biggest ones we've seen are maybe 25 foot high and wide, but they'll fruit at this height. The ones at my house, I have got 2 more of these clones at my house that are this tall and blooming right at the moment. So we, of course, it's a clone too. So it's going to, I don't know. Even when we grow them from seed, they flower at 2 feet. So.
So I mean, if you just keep them trimmed back, will they fruit?
Oh yeah.
Keep trimming them back.
Yeah, you don't have to let them get big at all. The only thing better about the ones that have a darker fruit. So on the one that we had at my former house I lived at by my mailbox, the fruit when it first forms is green, then it goes yellow, then it goes orange, then it goes red, and then it goes burgundy, and then you pick it. This one just goes from green to orange to red, and that's it. It doesn't have all the different colors on the tree. So some of the trees are quite, they're quite ornamental. They have all these little ornaments all over them in different colors. So the flowers in these are just little white puffs, maybe that big. But still, a really nice small tree for any situation. Pot, they fruit well in pots. For small areas, they're good. So. I can make it like $500. I need these for the cloning, so.
Oh, so you're not selling
Yeah.
it yet.
Well, there's always a price.
It's the price for everything.
But yeah, we want to take cuttings from this one and make new plants. Okay, any other questions? We grow all these in the same soil. Fertilizer-wise, now here at the nursery, we always start new trees in Osmocote, which is a time-release chemical fertilizer, only because it's faster. In the long run, it's better to go organic. And I like the formulas on these 2 organic fertilizers a lot. The Down to Earth Neem Seed Meal 612, the Fruit Tree Fertilizer 624. Those are very correct as far as what we need in the ground and in pots. This Osmocote is relatively same, just more stronger, 15-9-12. So high nitrogen, lower phosphorus, and medium potassium. It's what you want on any plant that you want it to get going and grow. When they're older, they don't need much of anything, but in the ground, that is. And on all these, regular watering. I mean, most of these are somewhat drought tolerant, but they sure don't fruit well when you keep them dry.
Curious why this one is such a tall root pot, and those are more wide and round.
This tells me I'm not supposed to sell it. So a lot of things I have in the tall pots, I go, okay, that's a special plant. We're not selling that one. So.
When you look at the roots, what are you looking for, like, to see if, like, it's bad or something that's going on? Like you were talking about something, might be affecting the plant, that it's not producing or whatnot.
Yeah, if you buy these same plants from other growers, a lot of times they'll have burnt leaves on them. The leaves will be half brown. and that's typical if they're using the wrong mixes of soil. So it's unfortunate in our industry, everybody's being taught by the academia to grow plants in compost. And it's because they've been handed research showing that it's better. But the research they were given is not a complete research. So what we've seen on the research that they've been given is that for the first 3 months of a plant's life in a pot, is in most places in the United States, and if you go to a nursery in Missouri, it's too cold to have plants in pots in the winter. They don't have anything at the nurseries at all in the wintertime. They bring everything in April. When it warms up, they sell it before September or before October, because after October everything freezes again. So they only have the plants in pots for 3 months, maybe 4, and the growers, so the research says for the 3 months it takes the grower to get this ready for sale, compost works better than dirt. After 8 months, it becomes a toxic medium to have the roots in. So you make sure your plants are out of your nursery before then. It's like, okay, what happens when you plant in the ground and that stuff is still there? Still hurts it. But they don't get it because they don't, most nurseries don't see their plants after that first year. Now in California, we've been noticing this since the 1980s. Yeah, you keep the plant in the pot with that compost around it, it can't be sold after 6 months. That's it. It's totally going downhill. And and the growers will tell you, oh, you kept the plant too long. So what I do is sell it to the customer and they throw it away too. That's the thing. We're in a bad situation right now where the academia is telling us to do the wrong thing. So we learned back in the early 90s. It took us 10 years to figure out what was going on. And so we figured out in the early 90s with help. I actually talked to a soil scientist who wasn't associated with the local universities on plants. He was a space scientist trying to get potting soil for the space shuttle, and they were surprised that none of our potting soils were anything near realistic. So that's when I learned about the soil. It's from that guy. And I said, okay, this sounds right. So we started doing our own test, and yeah. You don't want dead plants in your dirt. That's not where plants live. I mean, what all the industry gets wrong is they'll tell you, oh, you need the compost, the dead plants there for nutritional purposes. The plants don't eat dead plants. There's something else involved first. So the dead stuff laying on the ground, the fungi and the bacteria, that's their home. And when they get done with it, the plants get the nutrients back. But if you try to close this, forget one step and put the plants right in the compost, it don't work. The plants don't live in that stuff. The compost is meant to eat up plants, not to grow plants. So get the soil right, then all this stuff gets pretty easy. Then you can water this as much as you want. It won't rot. If you put compost in that stuff, you water it a lot, it just rots. That compost is turning into sludge. I mean, for compost to be healthy, it's got to be above ground and fluffy and airy. But you stick in a pot or stick in a hole in the ground, it turns into sewage material. And then the roots just rot away. Any other questions today? Now, the exciting thing that happened this week is we were able to grab a hold of 150 Carmen avocados out there. That's been our best-selling plant ever at the nursery. So if you want a good avocado, that one's really hard to beat. That's what all the growers in California want. That's what most of the growers around the world want. They want the Carmen. It's not recognized by the University of California for some reason because they didn't create it. It's from Mexico. So it's not being promoted here as much. But the orchards have bought millions over the last couple decades that it's been around. And finally, we're officially okay to sell it. We were selling it before, but we weren't supposed to. And now this year finally, or last year, it was finally okay for us to officially sell it and promote it. And if you want to know what Carmen is, it's a Hass avocado like the ones at the store, fruits and flowers most of the year. Instead of just one crop a year, it keeps cropping. If there's not enough fruit on it, it keeps making more flowers, more fruit. So it's a much better producer than the other avocado trees.
How do you spell the species?
Pardon?
How do you spell that type of avocado?
Carmen.
Carmen.
Is that a true, is there a true dwarf avocado tree or no?
Well, what they found is that the dwarf avocados, or at least the University of California, they had a suspicion about, quote, the dwarfs that they were creating. So what they did with them, they took Gwen, because Gwen was the first dwarf they came up with, but they had suspicions about, is this really a dwarf or not? Because it was growing about 8 to 10 feet with lots of fruit on it. So they cut off all the flowers for 5 years, and the trees without the fruit load made it to 20. So it's the fruiting that keeps them small. So the heavier fruiting avocados are all potentially real small trees. Carmen, being a really heavy producer, tends to be small also. We planted one at the Great Park in Irvine 2008, so 11 years ago. It hangs in right around 10, 12 foot.
And that would be considered a dwarf?
Yeah, among avocados, that's pretty small. Because the average ones are 20 foot, the big ones are 30. Carmen's are only about 10 to 15. I mean, we were counting fruit on it 3 years ago, and one branch had 50. We're going, okay, that's a lot of fruit. Yes.